OHIO. Back in 2010, Watershed Distillery launched their Ohio distillery with just one product, Watershed Bourbon. Over the years, it's gotten better, and it's gotten older and also has embraced a more traditional mash bill. Can this Ohio Bottled in Bond compete with the big boys? Let's find out on the Mash and Drum. What's up, folks? I'm Jason C. from the Mash and Drum, and today we talk about my hometown, Columbus, Ohio's own brand new Watershed Bottled-in-Bond bourbon that launched recently on July 1st. Watershed also released this 90 proof 3-blend bourbon, which we'll get into the details of what that is, but I'll be highlighting some local distilleries and their brands here in Ohio, including Middle West, Magnolia. But let's start with this Watershed, these two new releases, and learn a little bit more. Watershed Distillery was founded by Greg Lehman in 2010 on the principles of community, wanting to live in, work in, and contribute to the community in which he grew up. Now, Greg and his family aimed to create spirits that stood apart in quality and character. Along the way, they set out to form a community of their own, one that could gather together to celebrate and enjoy good spirits and good company. Now, 2010 may seem not that long ago, but at that time, Watershed was actually one of the new distilleries here in Ohio. Watershed Distillery has grown from a tiny little still and two guys in jumpsuits to a dedicated team of over 40 people and two much larger stills. About 2 months ago, Watershed announced the appointment of its new and first head distiller, Aaron Harris, bringing years of experience from two Kentucky-based distilleries with him. Most recently, the distillery supervisor for Lux Row Distillers, the makers of Blood Oath, the makers of Rebel, Old Ezra 7-Year, Barrel Strength, Regular Ezra, the Distiller Series, a lot of great brands, also the Daviess County releases as well. On top of that, he also served as distillery supervisor for Barton 1792, which gave him a lot of pedigree. He went on to say, "I'm happy to be here in Columbus and to be part of an organization that has become such a respected name in the craft distilling industry. We have exciting developments in store for Watershed's bourbon offerings in 2021, and I'm looking forward to making bourbon in the Buckeye State." So some big changes recently for Watershed has been moving from a 60% rye, 35% wheat, and 5% spelt mash bill to a more traditional 70% corn, 21% rye, and 9% malt high rye mash bill, which has given Watershed some more traditional flavor profiles. So I'm gonna start pouring these real quick in the Bottled in Bond. So that new mash bill also opened the door for Watershed to really expand their portfolio recently, with Ohio getting their own single barrel releases throughout the state, a barrel strength release, and now these two new releases as well. Let's start with the blend. So as I mentioned, this is a 90 proof 4, 5, and 6 year 3 bourbon blend, which is part Watershed standard bourbon blended with its 6-year apple brandy finish bourbon, and then rounded out with a source bourbon from MGP. So this bottle is named Watershed Distillery Bourbon and will be available for a suggested retail price of $40 in Ohio, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Kentucky, Michigan, and New York. Let's dive in. I'm seeing if we could pick up some of the MGP. I'm sure we'll get some of that apple brandy in here. And there is a lot of the apple brandy notes in here, definitely. I do get a nice mix of just pure, not only apple, but I think a lot of the, almost like a blood orange note is coming out, like a really strong citrus orange note. Still getting the traditional vanillas caramels here. A nice nose for a 90 proofer. But obviously it's really driven by that apple note. Almost like a Granny Smith apple. Kind of more like a caramel covered Granny Smith apple, I think. Nice little cinnamon punch too. That's nice. It's a nice nose. Let's go for a sip. Not as much of the apple brandy on the palate as I'm getting on the nose. It actually drinks a little bit more like a traditional bourbon. Let's go for another sip. Man, this is a really easy sipper. Not really much of a finish. It's sweet. You do get the apple notes a little bit. More of the cinnamon comes through. Actually, there's the finish. Kind of finishes late a little bit. It kind of pauses and then brings a little bit more flavor. But yeah, vanilla caramels. I'm getting a little bit more of a cherry note in here as well to kind of go with that apple note. Go for another sip. Yeah, this one's really easy sipping. I could see this as a good starter bourbon for people, kind of just getting into the category, because it doesn't really have any sort of burn to it. It's very sweet. Probably does really well in a cocktail as well. But yeah, this one for $40, I think, might be pricey for some when you compare it to some of the other ones in the market that could be a starter bourbon. But for this, I think being at that price point, being such an easy sipper, having a little bit of a sweeter flavor profile, probably a great starter for someone. All right, next to the one I really want to get into here is the Bottled-in-Bond 100 proof. This is 4 years old, using that 70% corn, 21% high rye mash bill, 9% malt to kind of round it out. This is available for retail price of $50, also in Ohio, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Kentucky, Michigan, and New York. All right, let's go to the nose on this one. Holy, like Macintosh apple all day on this one. Almost like apple cider. Get a little bit of the oak. The caramels and vanillas are there, but man, that red apple, that like deep, rich, like Gala Macintosh apple note just is the first thing that really punches you here. It's pretty light on the nose. There's nothing super jumping out of the glass except for that red apple note. There's some cinnamon there as well too. Almost get a little slight of like a peach note. Well, there's a little bit of like a stone fruit, like a peach going on in here as well. Yeah, and you know what? As this opens up, the apple starts going away a little bit, and then you start getting into more of the baking spices here. Not a ton, but again, it's more like an apple cider, like someone just dumped some, some good cinnamon in there. Maybe the slightest hint of nutmeg, but I mean, this is really just apple forward. All right, let's go for a taste. Here we go, guys. So I expected a lot of apple on the palate, but I really didn't get that. I got more darker flavors. I got some nice cherry notes here. Man, like a milk chocolate note just popped in too. Man, that was surprising. Let's go for another sip. All right, second sip, it got less, the cherry is there, but now you're starting to get into a little bit of some darker flavors here. The rich caramels are there. Almost like I'm getting like a coffee note, which is interesting. Not like a dark coffee, like a light coffee note. There's a nuttiness to it as well. Go for another sip. Man, for 100 proof, this drink's easy. This is a dangerous sipper. You don't feel the 100 proof really too much, even coming off of this. But it does leave a nice little lingering spice on the back end. It's easy sipping, but there's a nice little lingering, black pepper, maybe cinnamon, just kind of lingering in the background. That just is actually still staying, which is pretty impressive. I just, you guys know I can't stand a bourbon that when you swallow it, it goes and there's nothing left there. So you got to just keep diving in. This, you could kind of take a couple sips and just let it linger, and it actually just sits there, and it's like almost like effervescent on the back end. It leaves this little lingering, like bubbly spice to it. Let's go for another sip here. Yeah, I'm totally getting like this little coffee vibe in there, like cherry coffee. Like if you bought one of those like coffee syrups and you put it in your, a cherry flavored coffee syrup and put it in your coffee a little bit. It's a really nice flavor profile. There's nothing, it doesn't come across as youthful at all. I mean, it is 4 years old, so there are a lot of Bottled-in-Bond bourbons out there, even from the big guys that are releasing stuff right at 4 years. Man, this is just, all apple. I get so much apple on the nose, but it's not translating to the palate. Another sip. Probably the only ding I would give this is that it's coming off a little bit thin. I just wish it, for 100 proofer, I wish it had a little bit more heft to it. But the flavors that you get in here are very pleasing. Like I said, there's nothing off-putting here. A lot of apple on the nose. On the front of the palate, though, you're getting a good amount of like a cherry punch. Mid-palate, it starts getting into a little bit more of an earthy tone. Some of the coffee flavor starts coming out, a little bit more cherry. Then on the back end, you get a nice like little bit of a black pepper. It finishes real easy, but you just wait a little bit, and then it has like this lingering spice to it. One last sip here. Yeah, this is like a beautiful like cherry latte thing going on, which I'm loving. It's good. I think the earthiness, the coffee notes to it. I think this is a really nice bourbon. It's very different than, I don't even know if I would be able to, compare this to something. I haven't really, we just tried the Bottled-in-Bond from Chattanooga, did that review not too long ago. And that almost tasted like finish, like there was a huge like wine finish to it. If you're putting them against like Early Times or, even Evan Williams Bottled-in-Bond, like some of the more traditional Bottled-in-Bond bourbons, nothing really tastes like this. So I would think for anything, this actually stands out among those as something very unique. So let's go to the final breakdown. All right, so for the Watershed Distillery Bottled-in-Bond Bourbon, price $50, secondary, probably not applicable at this time for that, so we'll kind of leave that one blank. Availability, now I did mention that this is available in Ohio, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Kentucky, Michigan, and New York. It is a smaller distillery. They don't have a ton of distribution quite yet, but they are growing like most smaller distilleries. When it comes to value, I think the value on this is even. I think that $50 price point, when we're seeing smaller distilleries that are putting out Bottled-in-Bond offerings across the spectrum, you're seeing them usually at that $40 to $50 range, which is really nice. So right there at $50, that's right at that high point. I think the value is even. The most I would pay for this, right at $50. I'm not gonna pay any more than that. I think the flavors are interesting enough that it does stand out a little bit, but at the same time, I wouldn't go over $50 for this. Is this a recommend? I would say yes, but for anyone out there that wants to try something different, if you're very used to the traditional Kentucky bourbon profiles of like I said, the Evan Williams and Early Times, Evan Jim Beam Bonded, Colonel Taylor, Bottled-in-Bond. If you're used to those type of flavor profiles, this might be more of a try before you buy. But anyone that's interested in trying new flavors, different distilleries from across the country, I think this one stands out. It's, like I said, it's got that strong apple presence. It's got that this mix of like coffee and cherry on the palate. Not a immediate finish, but it does linger on enough at the back end that it does make it interesting. So again, for a younger bourbon from a craft distillery, there's nothing off-putting about it at all. I think it's got good flavors, some nice balance. Like I said, the only ding I would give it, I just wish it had a little bit more heft to it. I have had some 100 proof bourbons that just taste a little bit creamier and fuller than this does. But overall, it's interesting enough to stand out where I could recommend it. All right, guys, well, hope you enjoyed this quick look at Watershed Distillery here in Columbus, Ohio, and their new Bottled-in-Bond bourbon release. Also, their new blend of the Watershed Distillery release. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, hit the subscribe button below. Please hit the like button. If you haven't yet, follow me on Instagram, follow me on Twitter. Let me know if anyone of you guys in any of those states have found these, have grabbed one, what you think of it. And as I always say, it's not about the whiskey, it's the people you share it with. So, cheers, and I'll see you next time on the Mash and Drum. Take care, everybody. OH! When you guys can finish the rest. Well, maybe except for you guys that are in Michigan. Take care, everybody.